Okay, let's spend some time talking about populations and samples and different approaches to sampling to get your research participants. So we've already talked about differences between populations and samples in an earlier lecture, but to review, remember a population is everybody within a particular group. So it could be all citizens of the United States. That's what the census tries to do. They try to survey everybody that's in the United States. It could be a much smaller sample, like all the thetas at Texas A&M or all the members of your family. All right, that's the population. Now, a sample is a subset of the population. Now, there are a couple of different types of samples. So you could have a representative sample, and that means that the sample's characteristics are similar to those characteristics within the population. So, for example, if you're interested in having a sample of based upon age and ethnicity that are representative of the population, then what you may have, if you're looking at the population of college students at Texas A&M, what you would have is where you would have a smaller number of students who are, say, older than 30, because they do not make up a very large portion of the student population. So if they represent 20% of the student body, then a representative sample would have 20% of your sample age 30 or older. We still are primarily a white institution. So let's say if we had 30% total minority students at Texas A&M, then the sample you would have, a sample that would be representative of Texas A&M, is if 30% of your sample was also of minority status. So representative samples are really important if you're trying to use your sample to make a generalization about the population itself. That's where representative samples are important. Now, on the other hand, you may want to have a non-representative sample. And the sample's characteristics in this case are deliberately not representative of the population. So for example, let's suppose we don't want a sample that's representative of, say, male and female, or say minority students versus white students, but we needed equal numbers of both to participate in our study. What we would do there is we would oversample minority students so that we would have an equal number of students who have minority status compared with the number of students that we wanted with that were, say, white status. So for example, in this 308 class, with respect to men and women, because we have more women than men in this class, we would oversample the men. A proportionally higher number of the men would participate in a study compared to the proportion of women that would, because we wanted a sample that had equal numbers of men and women. We could also look at this in the same way if we were to sample cadets at Texas A&M. If you wanted to compare the perceptions of male cadets versus women cadets, you would oversample women cadets. There'd be a higher proportion of women cadets that would be participating in your study compared to men cadets, so that you might have equal numbers of, say, 30 men and 30 women. All right. So that's why you might have deliberately have a non-representative sample. So non-probability sample is where basically you're just trying to get a sample that fits your particular need. So a convenient sample is where you are wanting to get those people who are just willing to participate. I need you to participate in my study. Will you do it? And I'll get access to anybody that I can find. I'll ask people in this class. I'll ask my family members. That's a convenient sampling, just being able to sample those people that you have contact with, right? That's not representative of the population. That's not systematic in any way. That is simply, hey, I need participants, and I'm going to look at my network to get those participants. Now, purposive sampling is where we do selective sampling based upon a characteristic of interest. So let's suppose I'm interested in Texas A&M students, but I'm not interested in just any student. I'm interested in only Texas A&M students who are Iraqi or Afghanistan veterans. That's the only ones I'm interested in. So I'm only going to look for those folks and do a study involving them. Purposive sampling might also be where you want to identify people with a certain characteristic or experience or attribute. So one in health-related areas that we often do is we look at people that are certain, say, kinds of patients. So we might look at patients who are early, who've been diagnosed with early breast cancer. So we want to do a study that just involves those people who've been diagnosed with breast cancer, but it's still early in the disease stage. That's purposive, where we're only focusing on certain kinds of individuals to be in our study. And then quota sample, and this is where we sample different groups differently, men versus women or Hispanic versus white, to get our desired numbers. So this is kind of like what we meant when we were talking about, it's related to the concept that we talked about earlier with regard to oversampling. So for example, if I wanted 50 male and 50 female comm majors, here's an example, is I would oversample the males because there are fewer male comm majors relative to the females. So in this case, I want a quota. I want a certain number of individuals representative of a certain group. Now obviously, since we've talked about quota sampling here and we talked about oversampling and non-representative samples earlier, these are not mutually exclusive. So you just need to know what these different types of sampling are and what they entail. All right, and then you have snowball sampling. We talked about this a bit with regard to qualitative research. You get people who are in your sample that participate in your project to then maybe make recommendations for other people that you might contact to participate in the project. So therefore, if you get 5 people to participate and each of them give you a recommendation for 2 other people, then those recommendations might add another 10 people. So now your total sample is now 15 participants. That's snowball sampling. And volunteer sampling is where we announce or advertise our study and we ask for volunteers. And it's different from other kinds of sampling because where you approach people and ask if they want to participate, like we talked about a convenience sample. Are you interested in participating in my project? Please, thank you for saying yes. Do you know of other folks that might be that I might go contact? And then you go and contact them to participate in your study. All right, those are things related to convenience and snowball sampling. Volunteer sampling is different though. In volunteer sampling, this is when you announce your study with a flyer or email or television ad or something that's advertised on the participant pool that we have, and then provide a contact number for people interested in participating. So in this case, you ask people, if you are interested in participating, please contact me, and you give them the information in order for them to contact you. Then it's up to them whether or not they want to participate and take that step to contact you. With these other kinds of samplings we've talked about, we go and ask people if they want to participate, and then they can decide whether or not they want to at that particular time. All right, so I'm going to stop that lecture right here for right now and have another mini lecture when we talk about systematic or probability sampling.